Hey, this is Adam Green, creator of the Hatchet franchise and Holliston, and you are listening to Necronomicast. Happy Halloween.
From the haunted heartland in Omaha, Nebraska, my name is Brian Corey, and it is my pleasure to welcome you one and all to another episode of the Necronomicast. Joining me tonight for a late night conversation is the Queen of Halloween, Lesley Bannatyne. She's an American author who writes extensively on Halloween, especially its history, literature, and celebration. She is one of America's most foremost authorities on Halloween, and she shared her knowledge on television specials for the History Channel, the Travel Channel. She's written for Time Magazine, Slate, National Geographic. She wrote the Halloween article for the World Book Encyclopedia, and in 2007, her and her friends set a Guinness World Record for largest Halloween gathering. She's going to be here tonight talking about how Halloween went from the ancient traditions all the way to $1 billion industry. We're going to have a lot of fun talking with the Queen of Halloween on the Necronomicast. Here we are, kids, for another late night conversation. I am so excited to welcome to the show her first time on the Necronomicast, the Queen of Halloween, Lesley Bannatyne. Lesley, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing pretty well, thanks. Thanks for having me here.
I'm really excited to have you. I loved your book. I read one of your 5 books, An American Holiday and American History, so we'll totally jump into that. But I have to say, how cool you must be to be referred to and called and known as the Queen of Halloween. Huh?
Well, I didn't name myself, but, after 5 books, I know an awful lot about Halloween, or at least about the people that celebrate it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your book because, hosting a horror movie podcast and being just a big fan of Halloween. I grew up, I was born in 74, so late 70s into the 80s. I just loved Halloween. My birthday's in October, so I've just been all about Halloween my whole life. And then I pick up this book that you've written, and I learned so much more about Halloween, its traditions, its history. So I'm ready to get going with you here.
Absolutely.
So
what day in October? Can I just ask? When is your October birthday?
October 7.
7. Okay, so you probably did or didn't have Halloween birthday parties?
Well, it's funny. I did have Halloween birthday parties, sort of. My Halloween costume usually reflected something that was cool in the during that year or during that time. So I had a lot of Star Wars birthdays, and I dressed up as a Star Wars character for Halloween. So it kind of followed that way. It's like a month-long celebration of Brian.
Yeah. It sounds great. It sounds great. And what a perfect time to be born for Halloween, because you came of age during a time where the costumes really bumped up a notch. And you could get these great Star Wars costumes. Yeah.
Now, last year, not to get away from talking to you, but last year I interviewed a guy by the name of Rob Capriozzi, and he made a wonderful documentary. If you haven't had a chance to see it, it's called Halloween in a Box, and it's all about the great Ben Cooper costumes of the day. So, yeah, I had a lot of Halloweens in a box, so to speak. Halloween. When I'm thinking about Halloween, it's a pretty young American holiday, and it's got this weird long history. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit? It's very young in America, but its roots go back centuries.
It's got a really long tail. So in this country, we didn't do much about Halloween until the 19th century, really. But you can find pieces of what we do now back as far as 2,000 years ago in northwestern Europe, in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England. That part of the world celebrated a holiday called Samhain, which meant summer's end. And it was the time that winter was coming. It was around November 1st. It was about to get dark, cold, and dangerous. And the tribes would gather together at that time and kind of have a beginning of winter feast. They had to cull the animals at that time, so there was plenty of food, which just isn't true in the spring. On the opposite side of the calendar year, that May 1st holiday, there's just not enough food there. So this November 1st holiday was a huge feast. So people come together. There's lots to eat and drink. And it was more like maybe our Thanksgiving in that they played games. They elected new kings. There were sports. There were tall tales. Marriages could happen. Debts were paid. It was a large community gathering. But what makes it different from our Thanksgiving is because it was going into the dark, dangerous season, the spirit world was very much a part of it. So in that belief system 2,000 years ago, this was one of the days of the year where the supernatural was especially important. And there's a lot of old folklore and Irish sagas that talk about Samhain being the time that the fairy mounds would open in Ireland and all manner of monsters and beings would come out. And even if you go forward a couple hundred years, you find folklore where people just kind of go missing on November 1st around Samhain. And when they come back, they've lived like 30 years, but they're a day older in our world. So it's this very otherworldly, spirit-filled time of year. And people used it to define the future and to celebrate the life that they did have.
And a lot of our traditions, like, carving the pumpkins, a lot of those things we associate with Halloween, but those predates Halloween. The carving of pumpkins and trick or treating you were writing about in your books. There was a thing pour cakes.
Yep. For All Souls Day. See, because it has such a long tail and involves a lot of different things. This Halloween, and one of them is the Catholic Church. So around 800, the Catholic Church posted a holiday on November 1st called All Saints Days. Mm-hmm. And that was a day to remember all the saints that didn't have their regular holiday, like, St. Patrick's Day or named Saints Day. This is for everybody else. Mm-hmm. And it was a very religious day. But 200 years later, they felt the need to put another holiday in there. And this one's much more important for Halloween. It's All Souls Day. And so that went on November 2nd. All Saints on November 1st, All Souls on November 2nd. And on All Souls Day, you remember the dead. So it's still this recurring theme that there's the supernatural is important at this time of year. Only in this case, it's the Catholic Church, and they want to remember and honor the dead at this time of year. All Saints Day gave Halloween its name in that it was called All Hallows in England. So All Hallows Eve became Halloween. But All Souls Day, this remembrance of the dead that you still see in Day of the Dead in Mexico, that gave Halloween its juju. Yeah. That's where we get the otherworldly part of it. So that's, now you're back 1,000 years. So that has been marked on this time of year for so many generations and decades. And it was really the church that brought it into the modern age. And it was only when there were secular celebrations that came before the church holidays that our Halloween really started to exist over in Scotland and Ireland as All Hallows Eve, the night before the All Saints, All Souls weekend would be Halloween. And it was completely secular, and it had everything to do with witches and the dead and predicting the future and getting together and eating and playing games.
Yeah, there was total sense of community, like you said, like a generosity. There was a lot of frivolity. There was a lot of kind of checking out what's going on in the future. I was reading different things. There was different ways that people were trying to find their future spouse with these kind of parlor games and these things that were happening in the early days of these rituals and these events that kind of predate our concept of Halloween.
Yes. Bless the Victorians. The Scots poets wrote a lot about Halloween in a romantic way. And Robert Burns wrote this really great poem called Halloween in the late 18th century. And what he did was he put these amazing footnotes after the poem, which was written in a kind of Scots that would break your teeth to read out loud. But the footnotes detailed all the games that were associated with Highland Highland Scotland Halloween at the time. And the Victorians read the footnotes and said, these are fabulous. Let's put these into our parties. And so people would try the things that they read about, like peeling an apple in one pairing and throwing it over your shoulder and seeing if it landed in the initial of the man you are going to marry, or lighting a candle and standing in front of a mirror at midnight on Halloween, hoping that the vision of your future husband or wife appears behind your shoulder, or going out to a field and it's hard to imagine now, but going out into a field and throwing a skein of yarn down a well or a hole of some sort and waiting for somebody to pull on it, and whoever pulls on it is your husband. This can go a number of ways. There can be, guys in town who will climb down in that hole and pull on it,
Right.
Or it can just be the terror of being out there at midnight in the pitch black dark in the country, holding onto a ball of yarn that you don't know what's going to happen to the other end of it. So there's a little bit of spookiness and titillation and a lot of flirtation going on in these games.
I was reading your book and I was listening to you now with all these great historical anecdotes and stories about how Halloween was brought up and used. I just wonder how Halloween, from this kind of community-based, agriculturally centered, almost like end of like a New Year's kind of a party and gathering, how it turned into this multi-billion-dollar industry centuries later in the United States of America. I mean, your books are translated in other languages. Is that to benefit people that are in America now, or do you see like books being sold around the world, people trying to adopt what we've kind of adopted?
Yeah, it's the second, and it's really fascinating because one of the book is published in Russian. Two of my books are published in Russian because about 10 years ago, a publishing company in Moscow said, you know what, Russians are getting interested in Halloween. We don't know what it is. It's not part of our culture, but young people seem to want to do it. So we want to translate these books into Russian. And I think the actual, if you put the title, it was Halloween Nation, Behind the Scenes of America's Fright Night. Mm-hmm. If you put that into Babelfish or translate it into Russian, it says Night of the Eating Dead or something like that. So I don't think it translates perfectly into there, but there was a lot of interest in Russia. That surprised me. You find a lot of interest in Halloween in cultures that have a fascination with American youth culture, and that comes largely from the movies or television shows that go. So you find it in pieces of South Africa or in Hong Kong, Japan, Catalonia, Sweden, and even in places where Halloween originally existed, like Scotland. Now there's American pumpkins for sale where they used to carve their own large turnips and beets over there. Now they've got American pumpkins to carve. So we've exported this holiday that we kind of took in as a little tiny rural exotic holiday and then turned into a huge American celebration, which we now export. It is kind of an amazing transformation. And it's, it happened because of American merchandising and industry, and because Americans really flocked to Halloween, children and adults, kind of between 1950s and 1970s, and started to adopt this holiday that you didn't have to buy presents for. You didn't have to be with a family if you didn't want to. It was kind of a free holiday. It was a gimme for everybody who was on any kind of alternative culture. So it was this wonderful thing that everybody took to in a different way. And then once merchandising got into it, boom, we have a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah, that's amazing. I kind of grew up, like I said, in the 70s and 80s, and I don't want to say that's like the golden age of Halloween, but things, like you said, really started to take off and explode. I still, and kids still do nowadays. I have kids now, and so we go to the school. They call it a spooktacular. They have the big Halloween parties at school, and one of my kids' at school is like 600 kids. So when you go to the party, it's crawling with kids, and you've got just this wide variety of costumes, many store-bought. I love the creativity of these costumes, with people just making their own costumes. Growing up, like I said, in kind of maybe an early golden age, it was really exciting to see going to the store, to Target, to see the brand new Halloween costumes and the different kinds of makeup and the different kinds of things that you can use creatively to kind of express yourself. And that's just getting just huge now. And you got all these companies like, making superhero costumes, like Marvel's really big, but I still love when these kids just decide to make something creative and build something, maybe with the help of mom and dad. I just really like kind of there's a huge nostalgia factor for me for the days of my youth and Halloween.
Yeah, I mean, and the amazing things that you could do with a box,
Yeah.
So, one Halloween, my brother and I were a pair of dice, which was great. And my dad made the costume, and it was absolutely perfect and wonderful. But we couldn't move in it,
Yeah.
we couldn't get candy to our mouths in that. But there were kids that came to my house last year, I think, that had built their own computers out of boxes. They were keyboards, they were knights with all sorts of like repacking materials for their armor and swords. There were yes, people are still wonderful. Moms are still great at making costumes.
Sure. And then in the 70s and 80s, you had things, you've got this article on your website, and you've got a great website, iskullhalloween.com. And it's all spelled out for the listeners out there, iskullhalloween.com. You got a great article on there talking about how Rosemary's Baby, Pat Robertson, and 8 bottles of Tylenol changed how we think about Halloween. And what's funny is my daughter's in high school. She came home the other day. She's a freshman. She came home the other day and was telling me, Dad, did you know that somebody poisoned bottles of Tylenol? And I'm like, yes, I know all about that. I mean, I was that was my experience of hearing these bad things in the news.
And it didn't have anything to do with Halloween, the Tylenol murders. It's just that they happened a few weeks before Halloween. And so the entire country was kind of paralyzed. Like, what do we do? What do we do? There's a guy poisoning, or I suppose it's a guy, someone's poisoning Tylenol bottles. So we all have to be careful. And there were towns that shut down trick-or-treating just for fear of that. And they never did catch that Tylenol murderer.
Yeah, that's an unsolved mystery.
Yeah.
So what led you were talking about your dad made you this cool costume, you guys being dice and you guys couldn't maneuver around. What else sparked just this fascination and interest in Halloween with you?
I think I loved about it as a kid what many people do, and many people tell me they do, which was, it was a holiday where you were completely free. I mean, we didn't go out with parents. We went out by ourselves, kids, just swarming the street, running through the night with a tail or a cape, being someone else, being in disguise, and having the complete freedom to roam your neighborhood after dark and get candy. I couldn't think of anything better. I suppose part of it was the glamour of it. It was the one time a year where you could kind of really do yourself up as something totally glamorous or exotic or frightening. And, you couldn't do that at Christmas or Easter.
Right. And somewhere along the line, it became like this more of an adult
yes.
fest rather than, like you said, when kids were walking around trick-or-treating by themselves, there was no adults around or not as controlled by adults. And now half the costumes in the store are, and the decorations are themed for like adult Halloween parties. So is that just like people like me and you, like we loved it so much and like we're not letting go and we're just evolving the holiday?
That is a big part of it. You're right.
We don't want to let it go.
We don't want to let it go. It's nostalgia, and that happened for the first time. Like I would say, adults came back strong into the celebration of Halloween in around the 70s. I mean, adults had always had parties from the beginning.
Okay,
but Halloween became very much about children in the 50s and 60s, and that was for a lot of different reasons. But a lot of it had to do with the growth of suburbs and with the end of World War II and all these kids. And also with the enormous amount of vandalism and tricks that was happening in the 20s and 30s and 40s that the whole country was kind of trying to tamp down a bit and saying, can you guys please not pull so many tricks on Halloween? We'll give you candy.
Yeah, right.
So trick or treat.
Extortion.
Please. But in the 70s, especially towards the end of the 70s, a couple of things happened. Number one, those kids who grew up in the 50s and 60s trick-or-treating just really didn't want to give up Halloween. Another thing that happened was John Carpenter's Halloween movie, which came out in 1978, was the first movie that it was actually set on Halloween. That was a horror movie that was titled Halloween. And it kind of melted together Halloween and horror for the first time, really, like violent horror for the first time. I mean, Halloween had always been eerie and it had always been spooky, but it hadn't been like blood and guts. And that kind of horror movie attracted a lot of young adults as well as teenagers and older people. And so when that and Halloween joined together, you had two fan bases, the fans of horror and the fans of Halloween. And they kind of came together and gave the holiday Halloween a great big boost among adults.
When you said it was getting, like the kids from the 50s and the 60s were growing up, I was looking at some pictures somebody sent to me of some Halloween costumes from the 1900s, early 1900s. And they are the scariest, creepiest, weirdest.
I know exactly what you're thinking about. Aren't they weird with those shapeless faces and
sack heads, like sack faces, and like, oh, we're dressed as a clown, but it's the scariest damn clown that I've ever seen.
It is. They were totally creepy. There was not as much attention to, eyelashes and red lips back then.
Yeah, I take my kids to like Spirit Halloween when they open up in our community now, and you kind of browse and they have it all nice and separated and sorted and you know what part of the store to go to for this and that and everything. But I was looking at some of these creepy photos from Halloween's past. I almost think like some costume company should start like marketing vintage Halloween costumes.
Yeah, like serious vintage, homemade. The creepiness of a homemade weird pumpkin head it's much creepier than anything you'd see today.
Oh, for sure. And it's like these. I have a really great adult life, an adult perspective on things. I'm not complaining, but like these simple pleasures of Halloween, like you said, putting on a tail or a cape and running through the streets of your community at night. We don't have simple pleasures like that as much, and I think that really drives a nostalgia factor for a guy like me, for sure.
Yeah, and for kids growing up even today, I think you still can get some of that magic, because on Halloween it's not so much you ask everybody, what are you going to dress as? The question is more, who are you going to be? And that is the coolest thing about Halloween, because you can be someone else that night.
You can explore different parts of your own personality if you choose to do so.
If you choose to do that, or you can disguise yourself and no one knows who you are. It's just got a remarkable palette.
I guess the motivation for Halloween costumes back in the day was for more disguise.
Absolutely.
rather than masquerading, like disguising yourself.
Yes.
Was it because of the pranks that people were pulling back then?
Yes, yeah, you don't want people to know who you are. And that goes back, I mean, you talked before briefly about soul cakes and souling, and so I can pull that back now.
Yeah.
Back in medieval times, so, between 1000 and 1500, say, there was All Hallows, or all church holidays, were a time for people to dress in disguise, masked, draped, and go to house begging for food and drink. And it was a time for the rich to give to the poor. It was an equalizing time. It was a charitable time. And so bands of folks dressed in disguises more than costumes would disguise their voices, knock on a door, come into someone's kitchen, demand that they be fed, and that would happen at All Hallows and other holidays. But it stuck to All Hallows through today, where we still basically kind of do the same thing, more or less. There was a time where part of this tradition was on All Souls Day. People who were extremely poor could go house to house and beg for soul cakes, which the homeowner would have, kind of like we would have candy. They would have these small cakes, breads, pastries that they would give to the people who came begging in exchange for prayers for their dead relatives. So there was that tradition as well. That was a Catholic tradition on All Souls Days. But again, this mask, disguising yourself or begging for food or drink around church holidays or around All Hallows has been with us for a long time.
So that was kind of like the precursor to our modern day trick-or-treating.
Yes, but there's no direct line. So we actually reinvented, that happened a lot in Europe, throughout Europe, not just in the Celtic countries, but throughout all Europe around church holidays. This was a common occurrence. That didn't happen so much in this country, although in pockets where Irish people settled, there may have been some door-to-door begging and trick and souling even. In fact, there was, I know, nearby myself in the community of Lynn, people went souling in this country in the 20th century, the early 20th century. So there are these ethnic pockets where you can see this sort of masked begging that came from Europe, but not universally, never in America. We actually had to reinvent trick or treat out of whole cloth, in the 40s.
Yeah. I was reading and listening to another interview with you, and I found it super interesting. I didn't know this because I was born in 1974. I always take for granted that, well, everybody knows what trick-or-treating is. It's part of American history. It's part of American tradition. Trick-or-treat, trick-or-treat. We've been doing it for 100 years. Well, no, we haven't.
No.
There's moms and dads back then who were like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to go buy candy and leave my porch light on, and people knock on my door and I give them, what do I give them, one piece? Do I give them two pieces? Like, how did society, American society, learn the etiquette, the rules of trick-or-treating as we know it today?
Yeah, well, it took a while. It was an idea kind of put forward by homemakers to kind of subvert the trickery that was going on. But they couldn't, not everybody was on board at first. Not everybody understood it. As you said, what are we supposed to do with this? So there were a number of things that happened. Neighborhoods would do it. Newspaper and magazine articles started to come out to kind of explain what trick-or-treating might be. And also Disney put out this great Donald Duck cartoon called Trick or Treat early in the 50s that it had Huey, Dewey, and Louie and Uncle Scrooge. And they enacted trick-or-treating and kind of showed what it was and what it wasn't, because the little ducks were tricking and setting off firecrackers and things. And they had to teach the other ducks how to do trick-or-treating. That played in movie theaters coast to coast, and a lot of people saw that. And then the custom starts appearing on television. In Ozzie and Harriet show, there was a trick-or-treating episode where Ozzie and Harriet are baffled when kids come to the door and don't know what to do. And it kind of spread that way. But still, homeowners and some kids were against it still. Like, this is just extortion, we're not doing this. And so I think it's my opinion that UNICEF had a lot to do with making it okay for everyone to do it, because they started campaign started in the 50s that grew very popular by the 60s of Trick or Treat for UNICEF, where kids would go door to door and ask for money for charity for UNICEF, in addition to or instead of candy. And most homeowners could get behind that. And by the 60s, President Kennedy was the chief spokesperson for UNICEF. So it became really accepted that this is what we do now.
And when you mention charities, I can't help but think like the great haunted houses that I grew up on in Omaha in the 70s and 80s were all charitable entities. Like the March of Dimes had wonderful haunted houses every year.
Right. And the Junior Chamber of Commerce had houses coast to coast and a kit and instructions so that you could get it and do your own. Or churches had them. My first haunted houses were in churches.
Sure. I remember going and like the youth group would put on something for the littler kids. The high school kids would put something together for the grade school age kids at church. I used to go to all the great haunted houses in Omaha, like sponsored by the March of Dimes. And you mentioned UNICEF. So there's always been kind of like this generosity, this spirit of giving, as part of an American culture of Halloween, and that goes back to, like you said, like when the underprivileged would come to the richer people's homes and get this pastry, this soul cake. So there's a long history of that.
Yeah. It's it's time to share the wealth. Literally.
Now you're a great ambassador of Halloween, and this is really so. I've got a huge smile on my face talking to you because I can talk about Halloween all day. But is there like you hear? I don't want to throw like evangelical people under a bus. I don't mean to be doing that, but do you ever hear things from people complaining about Halloween or something like that, and you have to kind of be the good ambassador and say, well, no, that's not how it is. And do you ever feel like you have to defend Halloween, or did you have to defend Halloween and you don't have to do it as much now?
It has come and gone. And that's a great question. Yes, is the short answer. Yes. And I've had the pleasure of doing this for 30 years now. The first book came out 30 years ago. So I've seen a couple of waves. So this makes it much more interesting for me, because in the 70s, when you had, and this is before I started writing, but I wrote about the 70s, you had the razor blade and the apple.
Sure.
Urban myth that like the Tylenol, made everybody kind of afraid of trick-or-treating. Now, the razor blade and the apple is largely an urban myth, but people changed the way they celebrated Halloween anyway, and there was kind of this awful cast about it, and there were rumors of poisons and treats, and people were dying. And there are Halloween-related trick-or-treat deaths, but they are both. There are two famous ones that they're both within a family, like the people knew each other and used Halloween to cover it up. But it still pollutes Halloween with this fear and this danger. And in the 70s, two things were happening. The evangelical churches were getting very prominent, and lots of people were becoming evangelicals and becoming very vocal about it. And at the same time, modern day witchcraft was having a surge in popularity. Starting in the late 60s, people started to come out as witches. And by witch, what they meant was an earth-based spirituality that was kind of closer to nature and honoring the ancestors and living a certain lifestyle. It doesn't mean witch like witch with the pointy hat and riding on a broom. But because people were talking about witchcraft, and witchcraft has always been associated with Halloween and all of its iconography and graphics, the evangelicals and the new witches kind of made this wild brew in the 70s that spilled into the 80s and into satanic panic, and it all got tied up with Halloween. So yes, people would start to tell me that Halloween was satanic because it was in the satanic Bible, which which exists. I mean, Satanists exist. I think scholars say at one point that their largest membership might have been 500. Or one scholar calls it the greatest cult that never existed.
Right.
But it got an awful lot of press. And, in the Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, Halloween and your birthday are the 2 days you celebrate. So there were all these things tying Satanism with Halloween that just didn't make any sense. But at the time, people accepted that. So I think it took us a long time from the 80s to just pull ourselves out of that and realize, no, Halloween is a secular holiday that is viewed by some, including modern day witches, as a religious or a spiritual holiday, but it's a secular holiday.
American Halloween is most definitely a secular holiday.
A secular holiday.
It most definitely is. What a great thing, because like in my neighborhood, we live not too far from elementary school, so there's a lot of families with kids. And the parents, I think it's probably nostalgia factor. It's not so much, I don't think, a safety thing, but the kids go out and do the trick-or-treating. The parents kind of tag along and, have a couple beers. Some of the parents have fire pits out in their driveway, and it's a good way, especially now with this COVID thing happening. I think kids can trick-or-treat safely, but it's a good way to go out and meet your neighbors, say hi. All the parents talk to each other. And it's just a spirit of fun. It's like you said, generosity. There's imagination and creativity, and I think it's good to have a little bit of fright. My youngest is 8, and we don't show him the blood and guts and the scary stuff, but it's a great way to kind of introduce a little bit of nighttime fright in a cutesy way to an 8-year-old, and so it's just such a great time of year. If I had to ask you, what would be your perfect kind of way to celebrate Halloween? Maybe not in a COVID year, maybe that'll taint your answer a little bit. But I mean, if Lesley was going to go out and let's do something fun for Halloween, and even if you could travel in time, like what would you do October 31st?
Wow.
And then I'll tell you what I'd do.
Okay. I would have to travel in space as well as time.
That's fine. Go right ahead.
That's the hardest part, is that everything happens in the last 2 weeks of October and I just can't get everywhere.
Yeah.
During the day, I would walk through Haunted Overload up in Lee, New Hampshire, which is a great outdoor woods haunt, which is spectacular. I'd walk through them in the day because what's built up there is just beautiful to look at in the daytime. And I would probably be alone in the day. That would be great. Then I'd come back and I'd do trick-or-treating for the littlest kids in my neighborhood. I decorate the yard. I've got full-size candy bars. I'm ready to go. So that would happen for about an hour. Then I would need to get down to New York City and work my way into the Greenwich Village parade down there, which I love. It's America's won't happen this year, but it's our largest one-night Halloween celebration, and it's just a pure joy to be there among all those people and all those brilliant costumes, and everything is just outrageous. So that's wonderful. And then I would like to come back to a Samhain celebration, a quiet Samhain celebration with some local community, and just kind of quietly acknowledge the end of, last year, the beginning of the next, and with candles and pictures, and just bring it down and put it to bed.
That sounds really like a lot of fun. I didn't know there was this big parade, the one in Greenwich. Were you saying Greenwich Village?
Greenwich Village. Yeah, it's the Village Halloween Parade. It's been going. It's wonderful.
I think if I could travel around like a witch on a broom, I would go. I always wanted to check out some place like, and maybe it's too touristy, but like I would check out some of the celebrations like in Salem or something like that. I hear they have a great fest going on there. Mm-hmm. I would also have to jump in the H.G. Wells time machine and go back to like 1984, back to Midtown, Omaha, Nebraska, I grew up on a street called Meadow Drive, and I would have to grab my pillowcase. I remember when we graduated from the pumpkin, the plastic pumpkin tote,
Yeah.
and then like, man, we're going all the way down, and we're filling we'd fill the pillowcase. I'd grab my pillowcase, and I'd have to go trick or treating one more time with the old friends under the yellow streetlights of Meadow Drive, and kind of and see all the old places and the old houses and the old people, and because it was so exciting. I looked forward to trick or treating so much when I was a kid, and it never disappointed. There was a retirement home by our elementary school, and we would have they would take us kids up there, and we would have like a parade of our costumes to show the retired people that live there. And it was just so much fun, showing off your costume and getting candy and hanging out with your friends and not having parents around and filling up a pillowcase full of candy. And then I would come back to modern times and do what we're doing now. I really enjoy walking around with the kids and seeing them enjoy Halloween just as much as I did. And hopefully they'll, my grandkids will be trick-or-treating, and I'll follow them around with a can of beer or something like that. Now, you've written a bunch of books here. You've written Halloween, An American Holiday, and American History. I got that one. I love it. Next, I'm going to get Halloween Nation. What's Halloween Nation about?
That is the latest, and of course, because it's the latest, it's my favorite.
Sure.
It's about how Halloween is made in America. Like who makes it? Who carves those crazy pumpkins, and who makes the pumpkin beer, and who makes the plastic latex ears that you buy at Spirit Halloween, and who creates that parade or that haunted house. So it's me traveling around for a couple of years and just trying to meet all the folks that go into creating Halloween and trying to find out why they do it and why they love it so much. So that's what Halloween Nation is. It's behind the scenes of America's Fright Night. So who loves Halloween? How do they make it, and why?
That's my next one. And then, Lucy, you got Halloween How To, and then you got Halloween Reader.
That's right. That's literature from like 1500 to the early 20th century. That's purely Halloween. It's not horror. So that book, I had to look for things that were really Halloween as separated from spooky stories. So it's actually more of a cultural literary history of Halloween, like how was it seen in literature.
Fantastic. And then the last one I see here is Witches, Night Before Halloween.
It's a children's book.
Beautiful. I love the illustration on that too. So you've got a great website, I Skull Halloween. There's a wealth of information there. You have articles, published articles that you've written that you can read right from your website. Right. I encourage all the listeners to go and check out the books that you have. And what where are you calling from? Where do you live?
Boston, Massachusetts.
Everybody go to Leslie's house on Halloween, Boston, Massachusetts, Halloween night. She's got full-size candy bars.
Even this year.
Even this year. Well, Lesley, I've just really enjoyed this time we had together. It's gone by too fast. I just want to be. We're recording this at the end of September, so we can publish it in October. I know you're super busy. Are you just like nonstop interview requests like for October?
It gets busy in October, but I will say this year is already feeling different. I think many people just can't even think about Halloween yet. So I think it's been pushed back a little bit.
I understand that. Now my kids are in school, and school's already said we can't have the big traditional spooktacular big party like we always have.
Yeah.
But they're gonna take the entire day. Kids can wear their costumes to school. They're going to take the entire day and have Halloween fun for the entire day rather than just a nighttime party. So at least they're doing something, and I'm really in favor of that. That's good, and good for you. And I'm glad your kids are actually in school. Our kids around here are still at home and doing remote for the most part. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what Halloween is going to look like in Massachusetts. Well, if things keep going the way they are here in Omaha, here in Nebraska, we will have trick-or-treating, and a lot of the neighborhoods, a lot of the neighbors on our Facebook neighborhood page, things like that they're really sharing ideas about how we can do this for the kids so they still have fun and childhood memories and still be responsible and do it safe. And I think the children will have nothing to worry about. The adults drinking the beer and the fireball shots might have a little. They might have a little problem, but I think the kids will be safe. We'll carry on the hand sanitizer, and we'll just we'll do the best we can.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you're already masked. There's no singing. It's outdoors. I hope many people will celebrate it like you do.
Safety first, but I think there's a way to do it. So
good. Lesley,
I am so happy that you were a part of the Necronomicast. You brought some respectability and class to the show. I'm really happy that it's not often I have royalty on the show. So the queen of Halloween here on the Necronomicast. Lesley, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. It was a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. Lesley Bannatyne, the queen of Halloween, making her Necronomicast debut. That was a lot of fun. I so much love Halloween, and to talk to her and to read her books, what an experience for myself, and hopefully an experience for you, the listener. How about it? So, I hope you have a wonderful and safe, spooky Halloween. Hope you watched the Charlie Brown special. Hope you watched some good movies. We kind of did the Friday the 13th little marathon. Watched a couple of the Halloween movies. Watched Trick or Treat. Watched The Thing. What else did we watch? A couple of the Universal Classic monster movies. And we're going to go out on Halloween night, and we're going to do some trick-or-treating. We're going to wash our hands, we're going to wear some masks, but nobody's going to deny me my Snickers. That's for damn sure. Might egg a house, soap some windows, kid stuff. Going to put a nice little bow on the Necronomicast for 2020 in November and December. We got some fun guests coming up. I hope you continue to listen. Make sure you subscribe to the new YouTube channel. We're going to put some paranormal investigation videos on there, some behind-the-scenes stuff, how we do it here on the Necronomicast. And as always, you can email the show with your compliments and your complaints. And if you feel so inclined, give the show a call. All the details are at necronomicast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, everybody. This is episode number 190. Copyright 2020. Happy Halloween.